This is part 7 and the last part of the chapter 2 lectures. This has been a long chapter, but again, you know, it's a review chapter and there's a lot of information that you need from this chapter. So the last category that we're going to talk about of macromolecules are nucleic acids, and you probably recognize nucleic acid as that DNA is a type of nucleic acid. Nucleic acids are composed of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and phosphorus. So you're not going to have the sulfur that you have in proteins, in some proteins. The function of nucleic acids is to store and process genetic information inside our cells. And there are 2 classes of nucleic acids. There's deoxyribonucleic acid, or DNA, and then ribonucleic acid, or RNA. Make sure that you recognize the structure of a nucleotide. Just like the monomers of proteins are amino acids, the monomers of nucleic acids are nucleotides. So in other words, nucleic acids are chains of nucleotides. A nucleotide has 3 parts: a phosphate group, a sugar, but this time you may notice that glucose was a hexagon. The sugar that's found in nucleic acids is a 5-carbon sugar, so it's a pentagon structure. And then the sugar and the phosphate, and then those are connected to a nitrogenous base, and there are 4 different nitrogenous bases, and they determine the genetic code. The bases are adenine, or A, guanine, or G, cytosine, or C, and thymine, or T. Now, DNA contains thymine, but RNA does not. RNA contains uracil in the place of thymine. These are the structures of those bases. Differences between DNA and RNA, besides the fact that RNA contains U and DNA contains T. RNA is also a single chain of nucleotides, whereas DNA, you probably have heard this before and seen images of DNA. DNA is a double-stranded molecule that actually forms a ladder, and then it forms a twisted shape. We say that it's a double helix or a twisted ladder shape. What happens is that the 2 strands of DNA combine because the bases in each of those strands are complementary to one another. If you can look here and see that the A's are complementary to the T's, so they will bond to the T's. The G's will bond to the C's. So everywhere you see a G, you see a C beside of it, and vice versa. And everywhere you see an A, you see a T beside of it. So that's how we know, if we know one of the DNA strands, we can tell the code in the other strand, because we know that A's bond with T's and C's bond with G's. The checkpoint questions: describe a nucleic acid. Well, DNA is a chain of nucleotides, and it is double-stranded, and it's formed into a double helix shape. RNA is a single chain of nucleotides. 27, a large molecule composed of ribose sugars, nitrogenous bases, and phosphate groups is which kind of nucleic acid? I guess because the word large, it would be DNA. All right, this section is on ATP, or adenosine triphosphate. This is the molecule that our cells use for energy. It contains an adenine. You may recognize that's one of the nitrogenous bases that we find in DNA and RNA. The adenine is bound to a ribose sugar, and so that's the adenosine part. And then there are 3 phosphate groups attached. And when those phosphate groups break, they release energy. And that's the reason why we say that ATP is a high energy compound. We form ATP during cellular respiration. So it is formed when we break down glucose for energy. Okay. and I talked about this already. Describe ATP. It consists of adenosine attached to 3 phosphate groups, and it's a high energy molecule. When ATP undergoes hydrolysis, we can go back and look here. Hydrolysis, remember, is breakdown. So when ATP undergoes hydrolysis, it breaks down into ADP, and the phosphate, one of the phosphate groups breaks off from it. So that's not, I'll just write it. Hold on just a second. There we go. All right. So what are the products of the hydrolysis of ATP? So it's ATP breaks down into ADP plus P, which is phosphate. ADP is adenosine diphosphate. So ATP has 3 phosphate groups. When it breaks down, it releases one of those phosphate groups. And because it's a hydrolysis reaction, we can put this in here too. ATP breaks down by the addition of water. Okay, so that would be the hydrolysis of ATP. Let's go back. All right, you do need to know the biochemical building blocks. It's just another way of saying macromolecules that I've been saying for the past few lectures. The macromolecules of living things are carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. Make sure you know those 4 groups and that they are called biochemical building blocks. And they're the components of the cells that make up living things, that make up our bodies. The 6 elements common to organic compounds, remember CHNOPS, carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and sulfur. And then the building blocks we just named, lipids, carbohydrates, proteins, and nucleic acids. And that is the end.